All right, here is our video lecture on absolutism versus relativism. And I apologize, I am having some issues with my computer and the video is not working. My camera isn't, so you just get to listen to my voice and learn a lot. So this topic mirrors and kind of piggybacks off of the ethical principles and theories that we learned earlier this week. It's kind of building on the utilitarianism, the deontology, virtue ethics. It's adding another layer because it does give us insight into how people see the world, how they make their decisions, especially around ethical dilemmas. So we're going to flesh out the difference between absolutism and relativism. I really struggle saying absolutism, so bear with me. So really the big questions that we are looking at within relativism and absolutism is, does the end actually justify the means? So does the outcome justify the action steps that led up to it? And then we're also going to explore how culture and religion come into play and how can we hold space for these mindsets when it comes to religion and when it comes to culture. All right, so there is this statement on the slide which says truth is different for different people. Now, if I were to ask you in person if you agree or disagree with it, you both might have the same answer. The answer might vary, which actually is very telling when you think about the root of the question. Is truth different for different people? If one person agrees with it and one doesn't, well, that kind of answers the question a little bit. So if you disagree with the statement that truth is different for different people, you would have more of an absolutism perspective. And if you agreed with the statement, you align more with the relativism perspective. So what do both of these terms mean? We're going to start with absolutism, and we're going to look at it in the realm of ethics. So ethical absolutism holds that moral commands are true at all times. So this means they're true regardless of culture, regardless of situation, regardless of circumstance or results. What is right, and what is wrong is wrong. There's not a lot of exploring kind of that environmental impact that comes with it. So for example, under this view, actions such as murder and stealing are seen as objectively wrong, regardless of motivation or outcome. And so if you were in court for murdering somebody and you said, wow, they looked at me funny, or they just stole something from me or whatever, there would be no rationale or consideration behind the motivation for the murder. It would just be like, nope, murder is wrong, so you are going to get convicted. Very black and white. On the flip side, relativism is the position that all points of view are equally valid and the individual determines what is true and relative for them. Relativism theorizes that truth is different for different people. So going back to that quote, not simply that different people believe different things to be true. And so to kind of flesh that out a little bit more, relativism doesn't mean that an individual doesn't have a truth. It is stating more that everyone's truths are different. And now, regardless of if your truth is different from somebody else, the truth that you believe in, you consider to be right, regardless of the situation. So it's not like you're looking at all the different truths. You're just identifying that truths are different for all people. So I just found this little cartoon because we're going to talk about cultural relativism in a little bit. But it does kind of play into, when you're talking about absolutism and relativism, you got to consider kind of the court system and kind of society as a whole and what's been established, law and order. If we are looking at relativism, is there space for law and order, or is an absolutive perspective more appropriate because it creates structure and consistency for society? So just something to mull over. All right, we're going to throw religion into the mix. I know that in doctrine class, I believe relativism was talked about, because kind of looking at the fact of like, here we have this religion with these truths that are being held fast to. Is there room for interpretation? How do we interpret it? So I'd like to pose the question, is there room for a relativist perspective within religion? So the desire to have an absolute set of principles implies that an absolute ethical source, and we can deduce that as being God. So in the Christian religion, we identify God as the absolute. He is kind of what mandates what's ethical, what's right, what's moral. He is our absolute. So then this position, having an absolute ethical source of God, would be opposed to ethical relativism. Instead, the relativist excludes any religious system based on absolute morals and would condemn then absolute ethics. So God has the power to convey things to us that are absolute, truthful, and ethical. These absolutes, however, may not be to our liking or please our subjective taste. So we're sitting in some tension, especially when we work in a profession that has a lot of relativist vibe, self-determination. The client is the expert in their situation. That has some tension then with the Christian faith of having an absolute ethical source, which can be deduced as God. We think about like the 10 Commandments. Those are very absolute commands that God has given us. Now, is there some relativism in there, or is it the hard and fast rule? It is really hard. It's one of those things you have to wrestle with as an individual. So one of the things that I like to encourage students to do, because I can't give you the answers, I don't know if there's a right or wrong with it. It's a tension. And so when we're wrestling with this ethical relativism in a faith system, a way to process the tension is to remember that the context does matter. So we're kind of like dipping our toes in both of the absolutivism and relativism when we're kind of looking through this. So I'm going to give you a statement. Shaquille O'Neal is tall. Now, I hope this reference isn't so outdated that nobody knows who Shaquille O'Neal is, but I'm hoping you all know who Shaquille O'Neal is. He is a incredibly elevated or tall basketball player. He's known as a very large man. And so when I say this, I do think that most people would agree with me and say Shaquille O'Neal is tall. However, when you put him next to Kevin Hart, yes, this man is massive. He looks like he could eat Kevin Hart for dinner. So yes, that statement, that truth of Shaquille O'Neal being tall is 100% accurate in this context. Now, if we put Shaquille O'Neal, who is 7'1", next to a giraffe, Shaquille O'Neal is not looking very tall right now. And so we might not say he is tall because a giraffe towers over him. So this is kind of showing context does matter. So we can make a truthful statement that Shaquille O'Neal is tall, but when you compare it to something else or put it into a context, it changes the perspective of how tall he may be and kind of pokes some holes in this absolute truth that you just established. So I like to use that example to kind of help us see that we can have truths, but we have to consider the context and then wrestle with what we believe to be true or not. All right, so we just kind of compared religion and relativism. Now we have social work and absolutism. So is there room for an absolutist perspective within social work? So we in this profession talk so much about person and environment. I mentioned before the code of ethics saying, self-determination is a huge piece of what we do. We look at the client as the expert. That's a lot of relativism within the field. So can we have absolutism? Well, we have a code of ethics that says these are truths that we have to abide by. If we don't have absolutism, are we going to have anarchy and our society will crumble because there is no law and order? How do we then wrestle with this tension on this side? So I'm going to pose a question, which is it right or wrong, ethical or unethical, to slit open someone's abdomen? My knee-jerk reaction is to say absolutely not. Like, let's not go there. Let's not harm somebody. But let's flesh this out a little bit more. So like I said, some might quickly say, no, of course not. But if you have that discerning eye, it might lead you to say, well, it depends on why someone is doing such a thing. So here's 3 scenarios that involve slitting an abdomen. So here's the first one. In a squabble with a person you don't like, you become angry, you grab a knife, you lunge at the individual and slit open their abdomen. Can such a violent act be justified? I would guess that majority of the people reading this question would say, no, you can't just slit open someone's abdomen because you are angry. But then here's another scenario. A crazed killer or rapist has entered your house intent on doing harm to your significant other and your family. In an attempt to protect them, you grab a knife, and in the ensuing struggle, you manage to stop his evil intentions by slitting open his abdomen. Now, would this be, it's a violent act, but could it be justified? Well, is it self-defense? You're protecting vulnerable people from being harmed. Same technical action as the first scenario. Both scenarios show someone slitting an abdomen, but you now have a different context. Does the end justify the means? And then a third scenario, you are an OB surgeon and a woman is in hard labor but unable to give birth vaginally, and she's brought to you. Is it right / ethical for you to slice open her, sorry, that's really dramatic, for you to slice open her abdomen in order to perform a C-section? I would guess that the majority of people watching this would say, yes, absolutely, slit open this woman's abdomen so you can save the life of both her and her baby. Again, the exact same action at its root, you're slitting open an abdomen as the first 2 scenarios, but this context completely changes the reason for why the individual is slicing open an abdomen. So just again, one more thing to consider when we're talking about absolute truth. Are we doing a disservice to our clients and to society by not having room for relativism? Then on the flip side, if we are sitting in relativism, is there a way to hold others accountable for ethical and moral decision making? It is incredibly loaded. A lot of things to consider. And the reason we talk about this is because there's going to be situations within the field that make us consider and think about these things. Also thinking about if you're working on a collaborative team and you might align more with an absolutism perspective, but your coworker is more relativist and you are butting heads because you can't see eye to eye on what the best decision is for the client or for the agency or for the situation. We need to be aware that people are looking at situations in a variety of ways, and we cannot assume that everybody enters into ethical conflict in the same mindset and the same view and lens as we do. And so we need to have awareness so we can help understand other people's perspectives and kind of help work towards resolution. So this is kind of wrapping up those 2 questions. Does the end justify the means? The answer, of course, depends on what end you're talking about. In the 3 scenarios given, the same means was used, but the ends were much different. So to kind of compare and contrast the 3, ethical absolutists can condemn practices such as the Nazi persecution of the Jews because absolute views give definite guidelines as to what is right or wrong. Relativism can take into account the reasons why something happens. So, for example, absolutists would have to condemn a mother who steals food for her starving children because in their eyes, all stealing is wrong, whereas relativists can say stealing is wrong, usually, but as the mother needed to feed her children, what she did was right and should therefore not be condemned. Absolutists can appear to be intolerant to views of others. For example, if they are against cruelty of animals, then they would be against the Islamic practice of sacrificing lambs. But relativists would be able to see the religious significance and the importance to the practice of the Islamic community and therefore will not condemn it. So that's pulling in some religion stuff, lots of different angles to look at through here. So finally, to wrap this up, we talk about cultural relativism. That one was mentioned a little bit in this slide. Well, it was religious significance, but there's a cultural piece to that as well. I found this cartoon and it is so telling to me. I thought this was so interesting. Here we have two females dressed very differently, something that aligns with their culture. And the individual in the bikini is saying everything's covered but her eyes. What a cruel male-dominated culture. And then on the flip side, we have the individual who is covered saying nothing covered but her eyes. What a cruel male-dominated culture. And so that just shows the contrast of the importance of considering culture and the impact it has on ethical decision making, because these are two very valid points, but coming from two very different culturally rooted perspectives. So just to kind of summarize what cultural relativism is, it refers to not judging a culture to our own standards of what is right or wrong, strange or normal. Instead, we should try to understand cultural practices of other groups in its own cultural context. So thinking about cultural ethical relativism, it supports the view that the truth of moral principles is relative to the cultures. So kind of what your culture says right or wrong dictates how you would act and what you would believe. It says whatever culture says is right for you really is right for you, and that culture or society becomes the highest authority about what is right for each individual. So we have, this is all just the video video content. There we go. And there's going to be two learning activities on the lesson for today. One will be talking kind of about comparing and contrasting the ethical relativism and absolutism views in a court case that actually happened in Grand Rapids a few years ago. And so exploring that situation from the context of both of those perspectives. And then I have a video case study that kind of talks about the significance of culture within ethical decision making and how considering what is relevant to the culture and seen as right or wrong can conflict with kind of this ethical decision making. So it'll make more sense probably when you watch it. But we're going to do two application activities to hopefully kind of further reinforce this content.